She had been sitting against the bombed wall for nearly an hour before anyone noticed her. That was the first shock. At home, in the Valdori court, she could not cross a corridor without producing a small storm of bows and sidelong glances and whispered protocol. Here, in the lower district of the Shatara settlement, a woman alone on a piece of broken rubble was simply a woman alone on a piece of broken rubble. 3 children had walked past her. A pair of elderly Durrani men had nodded. A cargo hauler had rumbled by with a load of corrugated sheeting, and nobody had looked at anything but the road. Tsarevna had pulled her hood lower and pressed her back against the warm stone and thought, "This is what ordinary feels like." Her ankle throbbed. She had turned it on the drainage channel lip 2 streets back, the moment she had ducked away from the convoy's perimeter, and for a while she had managed to walk it off. Now it was swollen enough that she could feel the seam of her boot, and walking further without wrapping it was going to produce a limp visible from 30 meters, which would attract attention, which was the one thing she needed to avoid for the next. She checked the light. 4 hours. She had 4 hours before the convoy reassembled at the northern gate. 4 hours before the court found her missing and sent Counselor Draven into the particular kind of controlled panic that made every attendant in a 100-meter radius start quietly running. 4 hours she had bought by telling Draven she required contemplative solitude before the evening's formal dinner, and that he was not to send anyone to her chambers until the 3rd hour bell. It was the only lie she had told in 6 years of diplomatic service. She thought it had probably been worth it. "That looks like it's causing you trouble." She glanced up. The man crouching at a respectful distance, not too close, was perhaps 28, dark-haired, wearing the faded green vest of a settlement medic with a worn kit bag over one shoulder. Human. Brown eyes that were studying her ankle with the focused attention of someone who had been taught to assess problems before they became emergencies. "It's manageable," she said. He sat back on his heels. "I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm a medic and I've got a compression wrap in the bag, and it would take 3 minutes. Your call." He meant it. That was what caught her, not the offer but the absence of pressure behind it. He had already half-turned as if he was prepared to stand and walk on. 3 minutes, she said. He came closer and crouched beside her foot, opened the kit bag without ceremony, and began unwrapping a compression bandage. His hands were calm. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she was from or what she was doing sitting against a bombed wall in the lower district with clothing that, on reflection, was probably too finely made for the neighborhood. "Sprained or twisted?" he asked. "Twisted, I think." "Point your toes down." "There, does that pull?" It did, moderately. "Twisted then. This will help." He worked the wrap in a figure 8 around her ankle and the arch of her foot, secured it with 2 small clips and sat back. "Better to keep the boot on for now. Swelling's less likely to get worse if you have the support." "Thank you," Tsarevna said. He nodded, already repacking the kit. Then he paused with the bag half closed and said, carefully without looking up, "You've been sitting here a while. Are you waiting for someone or are you lost?" "Neither," she thought. "I am hiding from the people who arrange my life." "Neither," she said. "I wanted to see the settlement." He looked at her then. She held his gaze the way she had learned to hold the gazes of foreign dignitaries who were deciding whether she was worth taking seriously. He seemed to come to some conclusion, not about her rank, she thought, but about whether she was in trouble. "I'm Tamaz," he said. "I do a morning rounds loop through the lower district. If you want to see it, you're welcome to walk with me. Slower pace." She considered this for 3 seconds. "Tsarevna," she said, "just that. No house name, no title, no planet of origin." "All right, Tsarevna," he said, and stood and offered his hand to help her up. She took it. His grip was steady and then gone the moment she had her balance. No ceremony. She fell into step beside him. He knew the settlement the way people know places they have cared about long enough to stop seeing them. not with the tour guide narration of someone performing knowledge, but with the sideways attention of someone who was always checking whether the thing he cared about was still all right. He pointed out the water filtration array they had rebuilt last spring after the Eastern Junction flooded. He mentioned, without editorializing, that the waiting list for the medical bay was down from 6 weeks to 9 days, and that the 9 days still bothered him. He stopped at a supply station where an elderly Kavhari woman was sorting dried rations, exchanged a few quiet words with her, and moved on. Sarevha said very little and watched everything. She had read the settlement reports, of course. All the Valdori diplomatic contingent had read them, careful documents in careful language describing resource allocation percentages and population density metrics, and the projected cost of the reconstruction timeline. She had read them in her cabin on the transit ship and felt, as she always felt with such documents, that she understood something important about the situation while somehow remaining at a great distance from it. The woman with the rations was named Eleva, she learned, because Tamaz used her name. The dried vegetables she was sorting were the ones the children's feeding program relied on. The Eastern building, the one with the bright mural across its blast-damaged face, had been painted by the settlement's children over a period of 3 weeks last winter, because one of the aid workers had decided that walls should have something on them besides damage. "Who decided that?" Sarevha asked. Tamaz glanced at her. "Woman named Petra. She's not here anymore, transferred to the northern sector, but the wall is." Sarevha looked at the mural. Bright shapes, stylized birds, or perhaps ships, in colors that had no business being this vivid on a wall still missing chunks of its upper corner. Someone had painted around the damage instead of pretending it wasn't there. "That was wise," she said. "Yeah," he said, and she heard in his voice that he had thought so too, and that it had mattered to him. They ate at midday at a low table outside the central kitchen, flatbread, a bowl of broth that was better than it had any right to be, and dried fruit that was slightly past its prime but sweet. Sarevha sat across from Tamaz and drank the broth from the cup and felt the warmth of it spread through her chest and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "I cannot remember the last time I ate something I had not been told to eat." "You're from off-world," Tamaz said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Diplomatic visit." She considered the line between honesty and exposure. "My convoy is at the northern gate," she said. "I came down to the lower district on my own." He absorbed this without apparent judgment. "Then you have a time you need to be back." "Third hour bell." He glanced at the sun, still well past midday. "You've got time." She had expected at some point for him to start asking the questions. The subtle probing that people did when they sensed someone of rank. Where was she staying? What was her role? Who were her people? It was a natural human behavior. She had been told that by 3 different diplomatic briefings, and it wasn't malicious, simply the way intelligent people try to place others in their mental map of the world. Tamaz did not do this. He asked her at one point whether she had ever eaten dried starfruit before. He asked when they passed the medical bay whether she wanted to look inside, and when she said yes, he simply held the door. He told her, unprompted, that the settlement had been here for 9 years, and that 9 years was long enough for children to have been born here who knew nothing else, and that this fact made him feel both hopeful and sad in roughly equal measure, and that he had decided the hopeful part was the one worth acting on. She stood in the doorway of the medical bay and looked at the rows of clean cots and the orderly shelves of supplies and the 2 junior medics at the far end quietly updating their records, and she said, "Does the aid to this district continue past the next cycle?" He gave her a look that was a little more careful than his previous ones. "That's a funding question," he said. "Above my level, there's been talk of reduction." "Who decides?" "Valdori diplomatic contingent signs off on the reconstruction allocation," he said. "Their summit is this week." A pause. "Hence the convoys at the north gate, I suppose." She turned from the doorway and looked at him directly. He was watching her with an expression she recognized, not suspicion, but the careful recalibration of someone who has just realized the conversation was more significant than it appeared. "Walk me back to the north gate," she said. The lower district gave way to the middle roads, and the middle roads opened onto the wide transit corridor that ran to the settlement's northern boundary. As they walked, the shadows stretched long and the light went amber across the tops of the repair scaffolding. Her ankle held. At the edge of the transit corridor, where the settlement's civilian foot traffic thinned and the distant shape of the convoy vehicles became visible, she stopped. "You never asked who I was," she said. Tamaz stopped a half step later and turned to look at her. "I could see you needed one day of not being whoever you were carrying," he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. The convoy was 150 meters away. She could already see the edge of Draven's green coat near the lead vehicle, and even at this distance she could read his particular posture of contained anxiety. "I am the senior Valdori delegate," she said. "The allocation decision is mine." He took that in without moving. His expression, she noted, did not change. It did not shift into the sudden deference, the recalibration of respect, the performance of having been right all along. It stayed the same quiet attention he had given her when she was a woman with a twisted ankle against a bombed wall. "I know the settlement needs continued support," she said. "I am going to sign the full allocation." "That's good," he said, not effusively. The way a person says something is good when it is, in fact, good, and they have no need to elaborate on that. She looked at him for a moment longer. She thought about the mural with the birdsore ships painted around the damage. She thought about the broth and the dried fruit, and the way the children's voices had carried from behind the painted wall while they ate, and how she had registered those voices the way she had not registered sound in a long time, as itself, and not as a thing to be managed. She thought about what it would mean to walk back to the convoy and resume the shape of the person Draven and the Council and the Alliance Treaty were expecting. She knew what it would mean. She had always known. She was very good at being that person. "If someone from the settlement needed to reach the diplomatic office," she said, "with a concern about the reconstruction, a specific concern, about the Eastern District's water allocation being underfunded, they could submit a formal request. It would be seen." Tamaz was still. "I'll tell Eleva," he said. "She knows what's underfunded." "Good." She turned toward the convoy. 3 steps, and she stopped once more without fully turning back. "The day was worth it," she said. His voice behind her was steady. "Yes, it was." She walked the last 150 meters with her spine straight and her hood raised, and her ankle holding well enough that no one watching would know it had troubled her at all. Draven found her at the vehicle and began his controlled exhale of relief that she had learned over 6 years to let pass without comment. She settled into the convoy seat and the vehicle pulled away, and through the window she watched the northern gate slide past, and then the settlement's outer wall and then open road. She did not think about what she was returning to. She thought, instead, about the eastern wall with its bright painted birds, and about the man who had wrapped her ankle without asking her name, and about the particular quality of being seen not for what you carry, but for what you are when you set it down for a single afternoon. In the morning, she signed the allocation document. Full funding, Eastern District water line included. Draven noted that it was generous and asked whether she wanted to review the figures again. She told him no. He noted this with the careful neutrality of a man who has learned not to question certain things, and had the document prepared for her seal before the hour was out. She pressed her seal to the wax and thought, "This is what I could choose." She had not answered the political marriage question. That would come later, in its own time, and she understood now that it would come differently than she had expected, not as a thing done to her, but as a thing she would weigh with the same steadiness she had watched Tamaz bring to everything he laid his hands on. For now the document was sealed, and the Eastern District would have its water line, and somewhere in the settlement, a woman named Eleva would hear that a formal request had value, and a wall with bright birds would stay bright. That was enough, more than enough. That was a day that had been spent well.